were in New York, among other things, to meet with representatives of the Trump administration. What are you hammering out today?
We're here for the launch ceremony of the first ever Ukrainian company to be listed on NASDAQ, which is Kyivstar, our prime Ukrainian digital operator. But at the same time, the teams from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are meeting, and the Office of the President are meeting with the Trump representatives to discuss the next steps on peace negotiations.
Well, let's talk next steps. There are reports today about a plan by the European Commission to transfer some 200 billion euros in Russian assets to rebuild Ukraine at the end of the war. We're not even at the stage of a ceasefire yet, Minister. Is it time already to speak about rebuilding?
We always say that there's no need to wait because all the processes that take time, and even if there are investors that are interested in Ukraine, it is very wise right now to go to Ukraine, to look at the country, to understand what's actually happening on the ground, to look at the sectors. So, for example, back to this Kyivstar, it makes more money right now than pre-invasion. So this is the reality and not myth. So that's how we need to look forward on and understand what needs to be done and design some instruments that are going to de-risk some investments, but it takes time. So regarding Russian assets, it has been our position of Ukraine always that these assets will ultimately be working in Ukraine and for Ukraine. So this is just the next step in discussion with the European Commission onto how to actually use them and deploy them. So right now they're just used in overnight rates, right? And with active management, they can produce much more revenue that could also be working right now for the strengthening of Ukraine fighting Russian aggression.
You know, reports suggest that Volodymyr Zelensky is nowhere near reaching an actual negotiating table with Vladimir Putin, that talks have not been scheduled and Putin has no intention of scheduling them. Does that make it difficult for you to talk about post-war planning?
We don't talk about post-war planning. So, the listing happens now, right? So, I don't think that anyone would have believed, a couple of years ago, if we were going to say that the first ever NASDAQ listing of Ukrainian company is going to be happening during the full-scale Russian invasion. But it is true. Yeah. So, this is the nature of Ukrainian reality. The economy is resilient, right? But then, on the peace talks position, it has been always position we agree was what was suggested by the President Trump, that there should be a ceasefire immediately. We supported that. Then, there was a discussion with second Oval Office meeting with European leaders that there should be a bilateral or trilateral meeting with President Putin, and we actually accepted that. And it is coming to the end, this two-week period where Russia should indicate that it actually is ready to negotiate. Ukraine is always ready, as has been stressed by our president multiple times. So probably everyone sees right now that it's Russia that's not ready to negotiate. And all the signals that they send in is that they're not ready. And Ukraine is ready to negotiate, and we're ready for peace. And we're saying that there should be a ceasefire immediately. So this is the state we're in. But also on the battlefield, you can see that Russia is not advancing. It is kind of barely gaining any ground. So it is harder and harder for Russia to explain its supporters, its global South countries, why is it doing that, and what for?
Well, tell me more then about this stock listing at the NASDAQ today, Minister, and how crucial private business will be in Ukraine.
So if you look at the rapid damage assessment done by the World Bank with Kyiv School of Economics, it says that the recovery needs for Ukraine will be more than $500 billion. So no way public money going to fit this bill, right? So we understand that the bulk majority of the funding to recover Ukraine and actually to grow the economy and to do it even now will come from the private sector, which means that why this listing right now is so important. It's very important for us to access US investors, and Ukraine has been one of the prime countries to reach a major deal with Trump administration, the minerals deal or the deal about US-Ukraine investment fund, to actually get more investments from US into Ukraine. So we just say, look at the results, and Ukraine has been progressing steadily across the last couple of years to attracting new investment and preparing for reconstruction. And we see right now also through this listing that the interest in the investors during the opening ceremony, during the launch ceremony, was higher than we anticipated. So people also maybe want to do a peace play to have Ukrainian exposure, and I think this Kyivstar listing is a great tool to do that. But also look at the fundamentals of this Kyivstar as a digital operator, a big company that servicing more than 23 million Ukrainians. It just shows how big the market are, and how sometimes like the margins of Kyivstar are really one of the top in the world in this segment. So it shows that you can actually do a lot of business in Ukraine.
You mentioned the minerals deal. Minister, I'd love to hear a status update. This was signed the beginning of May and aimed to establish a joint investment fund as well for the reconstruction of Ukraine. How far along are you in getting this off the ground, and when will minerals start being processed by Americans in Ukraine?
Yeah, so there are several tracks that we are developing in this fund. Next week, we're going to have the first ever board meeting of the fund to actually adopt a lot of the charters and the documents needed to start operations of the fund. And we're also, at the same time, we're doing the pipeline for the fund. So there's going to be a big delegation from US coming to Ukraine in September to actually do site visits to look for the companies that could be serve as the first several investments from the fund. And we also agree on the volume of the seed capital of the fund together with US. So the fund is progressing very nicely. The other big thing that we're doing is we need to put more licenses for auctions from Ukraine. So companies from US or other parts of the world that can mine these minerals, can access these licenses, and then the fund could invest in them. So basically, this week, we announced a decision from the Cabinet of Ministers to put a big lithium deposit for competition. And this is one of the areas that we think would be interesting for US companies and for the fund to invest in them.
I saw that lithium deposit, but you're telling me that Ukraine will help to be involved in that bidding process to help select the American companies, not exclusively the Trump administration.
I'm saying that we announced the competition, and competition is free for based on the terms of competition. It is according to the processes that were developed within the laws. And yeah, we hope that US companies going to be bidding, and we do know that several of them are very interested in this, in exploring and bidding for this lithium deposit.
We'd love to talk to you more about that when the time comes and when you know more, Minister. We spent most of our conversation talking about rebuilding Ukraine post-war. Do you believe that Vladimir Putin has any intention, any interest in ending this conflict?
Well, should it actually matter? Like what we hear the President Trump is saying is the peace through strength, right? So how the development was before, we see that Russia's probably is not very interested in doing that. But then there are some pressure points through sanctions, and there is law in the parliament, and we also see like how sanctions actually work. And we see that Russia is afraid of President Trump, and Russia is afraid of secondary sanctions. So this is kind of the final beat, and the peace would come through strength. And then after the peace comes, we need to have a security guarantees. And as also President Trump agreed during the last meeting in the Oval Office, that this should not be peace for just 1 year or 10 years. It should be something long and sustainable, that the companies looking at us right now would be ready to invest in Ukraine, would believe that this peace is actually sustainable. So it only can come through strength and through some guarantees. And guarantees could come in the means of boots on the ground and something similar to NATO Article 5, but also Ukraine's EU integration, which would also kind of fix Ukraine's geopolitical position. So this should be all discussed during peace negotiations in complex. But we think that the outcome of war would go as a peace through strength, and then really like practical long-term guarantees, security guarantees that will enforce this peace in Ukraine.